This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, a weekly vlog series I do where I talk about limited magic. We're still in Crimson Vow limited review right now, but we've sort of entered the waning period. Preview season for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is right around the corner. We're reaching the point where we're sort of looking ahead instead of looking at the set we have in front of us. We're still going to talk about Crimson Vow today, and I'm still going to do a crack-a-pack of it at the end of this video. But we are looking sort of at a more broad topic too. This will be the last edition of Nizzanotes in 2021, and I wanted to take a look at the 5 limited formats that were on Magic Arena this year and rank them. Talk about why I think, which ones are good, which ones were less good, or even bad. And I just thought this would be a good way to sort of give a retrospective of 2021. It's also sort of the video, for Crimson Vow, or Midnight Hunt rather. I did a video where I did sort of a set review where I talked about like what made the set good, what made the set bad. And we're sort of doing that here too. I'll just be talking about all 5 sets, including Crimson Vow, in this one. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll start at the bottom. We have 5 sets that came out this year, and at the bottom, we've got Forgotten Realms, or Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which is the whole name. If you've been watching Nizzanotes or watching me stream or whatever, you probably aren't surprised to see that this is the case. I think this is not only the worst set of this year, but the worst set for limited ever released on Magic Arena. So, that's going back a few years. So what made this format bad? Well, actually, let's start with positive. Let's talk about what made the format good. First, there were some things that were good about the format. It wasn't that everything about it was bad. One of the things that was the most exciting about the format, and maybe this is something that created maybe unrealistic expectations, but one of the things that was exciting was that there were a lot of really unique and interesting archetypes that we hadn't really seen before. One of these was Black-Red Treasure. That color pair being involved with treasure was a new thing, and it was a really cool archetype for the format. Then there was the whole dungeon mechanic, which seemed like it would be a really cool, fun mechanic for limited. And I'm not saying it's not fun, but we'll get to why it didn't really work out, though. And then the other one that was really cool was the blue-red die roll deck. So, you had some cool D&D things going on, especially with the dungeons and the die rolling. But ultimately, this format, everyone knew it replaced a core set, and it was sort of the core set for the year. But when we looked at the previews, the dungeons and all of this stuff made the set look pretty complex and made it look pretty interesting. But in the end, it pretty much just played like a core set, which is to say, it wasn't that interesting. Apart from Black-Red, the archetypes that were innovative didn't really pan out. The format was, and it wasn't even like a good core set, it was a bad core set. There was bad color and archetype balance in this set. Blue was incredibly weak in this set, and it's very rare that a color is so weak that you almost always try to avoid drafting it, and when that's the case, you've got a bad format, and that was pretty much the case here. Blue was just that weak at common and uncommon, and similarly, Black-Red as a color pair was way too good. That was the treasure color pair, and that archetype did pan out, and it was really, really good, but it was too good. It was just the best by far. The quality of commons and uncommons was really high. The synergy was easy to come by. And another big problem for the format that made the dungeon aspect not really work out super well is you basically had to be in aggro decks. So any sort of grindy black-white or blue-white dungeon deck didn't really work out consistently. And I do think that mechanic was fun, and on the occasions where you did have one of those decks come together, which happens sometimes, those decks were a lot of fun. But in the end, it didn't really pan out. It also didn't help that, we had these 3 dungeons, but you almost always went through the, I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll show the dungeon on screen when I edit this, but the dungeon that had, the fewest rooms and was all positive stuff was the one you almost always went through because it just gave you the most value. You know, you could go through it like 3 times in the amount of time it took you to go through the really deep one. And then the one that did negative, symmetrical stuff, you rarely went through unless you were really trying to pressure your opponent and kill them quickly. So the dungeon choice wasn't as interesting as it would have seemed, and the dungeon deck and the die roll deck too, they just didn't pan out. They were too slow, too grindy for what the format wanted you to be doing. So this format was really messed up. You know, one color was so weak that you tried to avoid it in most cases, unless you got a really powerful rare or mythic. And the other problem is that several of the archetypes didn't really pan out. The format really didn't have that much synergy, and it was really all about aggro. And basically, this format lacked balance on a number of levels, and that's what makes it so bad in my view. So I think it's the worst format of 2021, and it's the only one on this list that I would actively say this is a bad format about. The other 4, I think, are all good formats, but we do have to rank them after all. So they do end up, some are better than the others. So yeah, Forgotten Realms, not good. At number 4, I have Innistrad Midnight Hunt. So again, I think this is a good format. I think the other 4 were good. 4 out of 5 were good this year. Usually all the formats are good, so Forgotten Realms was a really weird outlier. But yeah, Midnight Hunt is what I have as the 4th best format of the year. And, you know, it had a lot of pros. I like the setting of Innistrad in general. It was fun that we visited it at Halloween time. That's my favorite holiday, if you don't know. And there were some interesting and unique archetypes. Some that are, we had blue-green Self-Mill, which is an old-school Innistrad callback, but it was really executed effectively. That deck was a lot of fun to play if you're more into grindy games, and, I usually am. The blue-black archetype had a really cool take on zombies and zombie tokens with the decayed zombies. I thought that color pair was designed really interestingly with ways to make use of these temporary zombie tokens. I think that was executed really well. Grindy decks and aggro decks were viable in this format. You could do one or the other. You had to sort of have the right pieces, of course, but you could do either of them. And I also liked that there were these different angles within some of the color pairs. I talked about this a little more. I did a whole video sort of reviewing Midnight Hunt. I'm sort of summarizing it here. But I liked that, for example, blue-green could be a grindy deck, but it could also be a more aggressive deck. Those sorts of things add to replay value. And there was a lot to like about the format. The flavor was great. There were really interesting archetypes. And 8 of the 10 color pairs were very viable and competitive. Compare that to Forgotten Realms, where it was like maybe half. And you're talking about a set that's a lot better. However, there are some cons here. There wasn't really a color balance problem in Midnight Hunt. If there was, I would say it was a bad format, because any format like Forgotten Realms where one color is so bad that you just try not to draft it is a bad set. But there was some archetype imbalance. Blue-black was way too good. That it was a color pair that I just talked about as being really neatly designed. And it was well designed in some ways and some of the unique things they did, but they did make it too strong. They needed to bump some things up in rarity, like the 5-mana 3/4 that made 2 zombie token guy, probably should have been an uncommon. Things like that would have really helped keep that deck from being too busted. And then you had red-green and black-green, which were just, if they were open enough, decks could work out, but even if they were open and you were drafting it and you got all the red and green and black-green stuff you wanted, you still, on average, the 2 people at the table who drafted blue-black would have had a way better deck. And so the 2 of the archetypes were pretty bad. Maybe not quite never draft them bad, but only draft them only viable if you get uncommons and rares and mythics is pretty bad. And that's pretty much where that was. And that is what keeps it to, being the 4th best of the year for me. Number 3, I've got Innistrad Crimson Vow. That's where we are right now. This one, is interesting because I think they did an excellent job with balancing the 5 colors. I think the archetypes are very balanced. Every single color pair is viable. Some are better than others. I talked about that in my Nizzanotes video on ranking the archetypes in this format. But they're all viable, all 10. That's not something we've been able to say about number 4 or 5 on this list. And that is great. Color balance is good. Every color has a decent number of good commons and uncommons. There's a little bit of color imbalance. There usually is, but it's not so massive that it really detracts from the format very much. I think I like the setting again. I just like Innistrad personally. And I also think that the color pairs are really interesting. One thing that's cool about both these Innistrad sets is they didn't get lazy and just do, let's just do tribal decks again, like we do every time we go to Innistrad. And decks have like tribal sub-themes, but for the most part, they're not tribal, apart from Red-Green, which is a very tribal deck in Crimson Vow. The other 9 have tribal sub-themes. Well, 4 of the other 9 have tribal sub-themes, but they're not tribal decks, and they found interesting things to do. I like Blood as a mechanic a lot. It's the kind of thing that's not super powerful, but it does help with some of the biggest problems in Magic, which are Mana Flood and Mana Screw. I think they designed that color pair, black-red, really interestingly. The ways to use the blood tokens is really cool. I like that there are commons in this set, like Traveling Minister and Gluttonous Guest. These 2 cards they're nice commons. They're not overpowered cards, but they really work well in a variety of decks as a synergy piece. And I thought that was really good design, where you sort of have these cards checking boxes for multiple different decks. If we don't talk about the rares and mythic rares at all in Crimson Vow, it is an excellent set. And that's going to tell you what the con here is, though. And that is, of course, as we all know at this point, this format had way too many bombs. I gave out more bomb grades in my set review than I ever have, and I think there are probably 10 other cards I could have given bomb grades to. So there's like 30 plus bombs in this set, and many of them are unbeatable. The feeling of losing to them is rough, and that's a problem. But I think it's less of a problem than having some issues in archetype or color balance personally, because it seems less sort of foundational. And sure, there are some times when Crimson Vow hurts to play because you just get destroyed by a bomb or whatever, or you get destroyed by a bomb 3 games in a row, which happens. But the plus side is you also get to play with cool bombs. There's some value there, but that is what holds it to number 3. That's what makes it only the 3rd best set. That's really the only con, is that the rares and mythic rares are too good, basically. There's too many of them that are too good. So yeah, Crimson Vow, I like it. 3rd best set in the format in the year for limited. So now we're moving into the top 2, and I think both of these are great limited formats. They're sort of the top tier. We have Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt in the middle, and Forgotten Realms, basically underground somewhere in terms of quality as a limited format. And number 2, I've got Strixhaven. Okay, so this is another set that I thought had a cool setting. A lot of people were like, it's Harry Potter or whatever. And, magical schools existed before Harry Potter, and they've existed since. And it's certainly inspired by it in many ways. But I guess some of this has to do, with me being at least, basically at this point, a former academic. I have a PhD in history. I teach, as an adjunct instructor at a couple of different schools. And so I like the college setting. I thought that was pretty cool flavor-wise. And it was also kind of refreshing to have a set where you really only have 5 archetypes. In some ways that can be bad, where you only have 5 archetypes because you have less replay value. But I think they made all 5 color pairs, with maybe one exception that I'll mention when I talk about the cons. They made all 5 of them deep enough and interesting enough that there was still a lot of replay value to be had here. And it was cool, being in one of these schools, one of these colleges and everything like that. And the thing from here that really pushes Strixhaven into being a great limited format for me was the learn and lesson mechanics. So, draft is fun and all, but there were any format that sort of gives you a refreshing take and makes you sort of rethink the way you're drafting, having to sort of change what is sort of the way you think about limited is really interesting to me. And the use of cards with learn and lessons, lessons were cards that you were drafting to put in your sideboard. That's was a new, innovative, neat thing. And then you had these cards with Learn that could grab these lessons, and it had sort of a toolbox feel, which I thought was really fun. And it was really fascinating, as a limited player, seeing that cards that just wouldn't be that good, like if they were in your main deck, like, the card that gave a +2/+2, plus 2+1/+1 counters and vigilance to a creature and was 3 colorless. That wouldn't be very good, like as a regular card in your deck. But when you could wish for it, when you could effectively get it out of your sideboard with a card that also already did something nice with that learned for you, it felt amazing. And all of these cards were really fascinating to see how that panned out. And it was really hard to predict how the format would be, just because we'd never seen anything like it. And all of that was a lot of fun. And I think learning and the learn lesson aspect of the format for me is what really makes it great. In addition to the fact that there's some pretty good balance for the most part. There is one con here, and it's kind of a big one. In a set with only 5 color pairs that are super viable. One of them was a huge disappointment, and that was red-white, or Lorehold as it was called in that set. And for me, that was a huge bummer because, they're the historians and archaeologists. I had a Lorehold preview card. I was excited too, not only for the flavor because I'm a historian, etc., but also I was really excited because what they were doing with red white seemed really neat and innovative. You had these cards that looked at cards leaving your graveyard and you got bonuses out of it. But that archetype did not pan out basically at all. It was very hard for it to come together that way. If you did play red-white, you usually just ended up in an aggro deck. And meanwhile, the other 4 color pairs were all very mechanically synergistic and really interesting. Red-white looked like it would be, but it didn't pan out. And, Strixhaven's not a perfect set, but it is a very good one, a great one even in terms of limited. And so, yeah, Strixhaven I have at number 2. And then at number 1, there's only one left here, and it was the first one of the year, so they started off on a high note, and that was Caldheim. So this is another one where I was excited about the setting and the flavor. My specialty in history is medieval Europe, and set is based on Viking Age culture and history. And so, I was really excited for the flavor, how they would execute on different things. I did a video talking about things I hoped we would see in Caldheim. I did a video, praising the flavor in Caldheim and how it worked out historically and things like that. I thought that was really fun. I thought flavor-wise, it was also fun that, it's a set with a bunch of snow stuff going on, and it was at the time of year, it was in the winter. So I always sort of like that aspect if a set sort of feels festive or for one reason or another, and that's what we had with Caldheim. I think the color balance and the archetype balance were both pretty good. And just like I liked Strixhaven because of the interesting choices, I liked the snow basic land aspect of this set because that also made you make interesting choices. You never take the basic land out of a pack, right, in limited ever, but you do in a set like Caldheim because they have snowlands, and there are a lot of cards that are powered by these snowlands, and you would find yourself taking especially the blue, red, and green lands, snow-covered lands, pretty high, like at sea level, a very playable card, and you needed these lands to really power those colors frequently. There was just a lot going on, and that made for interesting choices, just like Learn and Lesson did, and that made things really engaging. So I liked everything about Caldheim, basically, is what I'm saying. I liked the flavor, I liked the setting, I liked how the game played, I especially loved the snow mechanic. I loved all of that stuff. But it's not a perfect set either, not quite. There is one con, and that is that the color balance wasn't perfect. I said pretty good. I think 4 of the colors were all pretty close in power, but white was kind of a notch below the other 4. Not so much farther below that you couldn't draft it or anything, but it was certainly the weakest color, and that was pretty evident. And, I think a perfect format has color balance and archetype balance. And this one didn't quite get there, but it got like 90% of the way there. And I also really like the archetypes, the snow, all of that. So Kaldheim, I think, was the best limited format of 2021. And, to recap, I have Forgotten Realms at number 5, Innistrad Midnight Hunt at number 4, Innistrad Crimson Vow at number 3, Strixhaven at number 2, and Kaldheim at number 1. Again, it was a pretty good year for limited. It was really interesting because Caldheim and Strixhaven were the first two, and so we were really riding high after those first two, and then Forgotten Realms came out, and it was like, wait, they can make a bad limited format still? Because they did. Luckily, they rebounded with Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt, both good formats, even if they aren't as good as what we started the year with. So, yeah, those are my picks. Top five, I mean, there's only five of them, limited formats that were on Magic Arena. So, to close out this episode, we'll be doing a crack-a-pack of Crimson Vow, talk about what I would pick out of this pack, and talk about each of the cards in it. This may be the last or second to last of these crack-a-packs we do as we move into sort of the period between Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and the current format, which is Crimson Vow. But we'll do a crack-a-pack now, and yeah. All right, so here's our pack. We've got Binding Geist as our first common. Seen this card a lot in our crack-a-packs, I feel like. Decent card, attacks decently well in the early game, and then can trade okay, and then it can turn into an unexciting but effective aura in the later part of the game. Definitely not something you first pick, but certainly playable. Bloody Betrayal is next. This is mostly something you don't play, except, if you're in the most aggressive deck that cares about blood ever, which occasionally happens. Bloody Betrayal can make some sense. Like, you steal your opponent's thing, and then you attack with the 3/3 who can make their creature unable to block if you sack a blood. Like, that kind of turn can happen, and in some decks it'll make the cut, but mostly you don't play it. And even in your typical black-red deck or red-white deck, you don't play it. But it does occasionally make the cut. You certainly don't take it early. Massive Might, this is a nice trick, and I think right now would be what I would take, even over Binding Geist. I'm always someone who's skeptical and a little down on tricks, but when they cost 1 mana, you're starting to get into a place where it's a real sweet spot, because you're just spending so little mana, and if you can really win combat with that, get rid of an opponent's card on the board for 1 mana and trample over and do damage, you're doing a good job. It is still a trick, and there's basically no way it's what we end up first picking here, but it is one that is so efficient and so effective in aggressive decks that I find myself playing one, especially in red-green. I mostly end up playing one. In an ideal world, I like to have one even, at least when I draft that deck. But you don't play it in non-aggressive decks, and that certainly hurts its stock a little bit. Wretched Throng, this is good if you can get at least one more of them, and if you get more than that, it gets better. I don't like taking the first one super early, like if you took it here and you're like, well, I'm sure I'll get like 4, and when I do, this pick will feel like it was worth it, and that would be true. But you're leaving too much up to chance there. Even if you end up with 2, spending a first pick on this isn't going to feel good. Even 3, maybe not. I think you do need to end up with like 4 of them, and you need to be in a deck that can really utilize their deaths, with exploit or whatever to make it work in the first place. So you don't take it early. I would take Massive Might over it here. Witch's Web, this is a trick too. I'm a lot lower on it, and this sort of shows you how massive the difference is between 1 and 2 mana. This gives a bigger boost for 1 more mana, and it also gives a keyword, and it untaps your creature. But the thing here is that, yes, those parts of the card matter. The untap and reach part matter, but they're more defensive, and using tricks defensively is generally a lot worse than using them offensively. Your opponent's more likely to have mana up on their own turn when they're attacking you, and they're more likely to blow you out than they are when you're the one who's attacking them, because they've had their turn, right? They've done what they were going to do on their turn. And so, it's not a great trick. You play it in some aggressive decks, but you'd rather have Massive Might basically every single time. That's what I would still go with here. Boy, we have a lot of medium or worse commons here. We've got Estwald Shield Basher next. This is a card that on paper looks pretty good, but because there are 3 commons that can kill it, and for 1 mana, it gets a lot worse. That trade just feels awful. There are, I'm not saying don't play it. I'm just saying it looks way worse than it is. Playing one of them in your like green-white deck or whatever happens all the time, and it's a perfectly fine card. It's just not nearly as good as it looks. You really get in your head this idea that, like, man, this will never die because I can just attack with it and make it indestructible. But it will. So if you end up playing against, like, a blue deck, chances are better that it doesn't die, but it's going to die to the other 3. There's 1 in black, 1 in red, and 1 in white that just kill it for 1 mana, and they're all commons. So, yeah, that makes it a lot worse. Moldgraph Millipede, haven't been super impressed with it. It is sort of a card that can work in blue-green and black-green, which I think are the two decks that are the hardest to make work in the format. But when they do work, Moldgraph Millipede is usually your common payoff, and it does the job. But I think I'm still taking Massive Might out of this whole bottom row. That's how medium the bottom row is. Next up, we've got Aim for the Head. Another not great common. It's an okay sideboard card. You play it in your main deck sometimes because, Mind Rot is usually semi-playable and the zombie alternate mode is nice. All right, we're finally at another common I would take over Massive Might, and that is Blood Petal Celebrant. It attacks well, which is what you want to be doing in basically all the red decks in the format, and the fact it gives you blood is good. It's a nice common. I would take it over Massive Might for sure. Next up, we've got Cruel Witness, another good common. So we did finish up with two commons that I feel okay or better about first picking. Cruel Witness is a nice, efficient flyer, which has a nice trigger. The trigger ability, lets you surveil, and that is pretty useful. And, it's a pretty well-costed flyer that can do some damage, and I would take it over Blood Petal Celebrant. Let's move into uncommons now. Well, first up, we've got Dormant Grove, and I think this will become our new first pick. It is a very strong little engine. A +1/+1 counter every turn for 4 is, if you're like behind, that's not the best rate ever. But most of the time, the fact that it impacts the board right away by giving you a counter and then sort of snowballs is great. And then you can kind of control whether or not you want it to flip on a lot of board states, whether you want to spread out the +1/+1 counters. And then ultimately, you do usually flip it, and it makes for an attack that is often pretty devastating because this 3/6 with Vigilance can now attack with everything else, and the rest of your board has Vigilance because it's transformed, and once that happens, it becomes a lot easier to just swing out because you're going to have some guys left to block, and there are a lot of games that are ended by Dormant Grove doing its thing for a few turns and then transforming. It's a great uncommon, and easily the first pick here. I would take it way above Cruel Witness and Blood Petal Celebrant. Our next uncommon is Geistlight Snare. So we had bad commons. Now we have a pretty bad uncommon. This sort of the tempting thing is to imagine that you're casting this as an upgraded mana leak for 1 mana, and that would be a pretty good card in Limited. But making that happen isn't as easy as you might hope. Oftentimes it costs 3. And, even if you can get it down to 2, Mana Leak itself isn't an amazing card in Limited. It's a playable card, certainly, and it's one that does its thing, especially early, where you can really snipe an opponent's spell. But it's still a counter spell, it's still situational, and because it's not a hard counter, it loses its value as the game goes on. So, Geistlight Snare's not great. Neither is Bride's Gown or other uncommon. It's okay if you're in an aggressive deck, but I even if I have it and Groom's Finery, I'm not sure how much I want to play them. If you could guarantee you're always going to get them and play together, then yeah, but they're both just so mediocre alone, and they're both uncommon. The chances of getting them both aren't great to begin with, and getting them both in play after you do get them both is even harder. We do have a rare, but it's not really a great one. It is better than most of the cards in this pack. It's Investigator's Journal. This would be a card that would be really great in a format that you had more time to do grindier things, like really grindy things. And you can do that in this format in the right decks, especially if you're in black-white. That's like the most consistently successful of the grindy decks in the format. And it's pretty good there. It's sort of, you get a bunch of tokens on it, a bunch of counters on it, and then you draw cards with it. And eventually those cards will win you the game. But playing this thing out and then having to tap the mana for it, in the early game when you're getting beat down, just feels terrible. So this is a pretty weak pack overall. I think it goes Dormant Grove, Cruel Witness, Investigator's Journal, Blood Petal Celebrant, and then Massive Might. I think that's the order I would take cards in here. Weak pack. The commons there's 2 good commons and 1 good uncommon, and only a solid, little bit more than solid rare. So it's a pretty weak pack overall. Hopefully the person who's next to you didn't open an insane bomb, but they probably did, because that's the name of the game in this format. All right, well, that does it for this edition of Nizzanotes. Let me know if you enjoyed this ranking of the formats thing I did. Let me know at the very least whether I should do it again in 2022. I enjoyed doing it. I like talking about the formats and sort of ranking them and critiquing them. So it was a lot of fun for me. Hope it was for you too. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of Nizzanotes and set reviews like for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and draft videos and all kinds of other Magic content too, in addition to all that limited stuff. Go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications so you can stay aware. If you want to catch up on the stuff I've already done, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and this channel, you can do that on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and Happy New Year.